Hi, I'm Kent,
And I'm Anna.
and this is Film and Family. We're married, wildly in love with each other, we actually like our kids most of the time, and we make feature films.
We are living proof that film and family are not mutually exclusive, and we believe that anyone, in any circumstance, can make a feature film.
Hit subscribe to never miss an episode.
Let's jump right in. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Today we wanted to take you behind the scenes a little bit and just talk about test screening. We've been in the test screening phase for, what, 2 months
A little
now?
while. Yeah, hard to say when it started and when it stopped. I think that a perspective that I wanted to take on the film, right now we're on post-production on our feature film, if you're new to the podcast, and we're getting really close to picture lock. It keeps taking longer than we want it to, but just because
So
of time,
worth it,
just
though.
because of time limitations. But we know that the edit has a huge impact on the film, and it's been nice actually to see how it's improved. I think even maybe sometimes a little beyond what I thought was possible, and it still has room to grow. But I listened once to the sort of post-production, really editorial workflow that Adam McKay talks about, who directed Vice, and he talks about working with his editor on that movie. And it was just really interesting because he wanted to launch into test screenings and do a lot. Like, he pushed for lots and lots of test screenings, and to the point where it was kind of a burden on his editor, he said. But on this film, we haven't been done on like a huge or like an enormously copious number of test screenings, but we've really wanted to push ourselves to set dates and say we're testing the film that day, that time, that place, no matter what. We start inviting people so that we know and that we're motivated. And honestly, each one of those test screenings, I think, has kind of forced us to push it a little farther, because when you know you're going to show it to people, it really does. You kind of go, okay, this is not good enough. Like, this isn't really done. And so you push it a little harder, and it helps you move a little faster, I think. But also it's just incredibly illuminating for us as filmmakers to test screen, especially a narrative feature.
Yeah, and we sent out an email earlier this week with the questions we use for feedback, which we love using those questions. Some of them we learned in film school, and it's kind of the best collection of questions to ask for feedback that we've found, that we've compiled into this.
And they'll shift a
Yeah,
little bit,
we can adjust
movie
it.
to movie and project to project. And we'd love to hear if you all go to that email and find that download.
If you're joining after we sent this email, just send us an email if you want a copy and we can forward it to you, because this is another great free resource, and you can feel free to steal it and apply those questions to your story, whether you're in screenwriting phase or post-production phase or any phase where you need to collect feedback on the story and characters. These questions have been very illuminating. So you can look for that. But today we just kind of want to talk about some of our best test screening practices or things that we've learned through this process of screening. And we've done 3 in-person test screenings now, and virtually we've done a lot. I don't even know how many.
Well,
It's kind of
sometimes
sent out to individuals in
if it's
waves.
people we want their specific feedback, like trusted friends and collaborators and professors and such, we'll solicit feedback from them via email and ask them to watch the film and then jump on a phone call with us so that they'll fill out the form usually. Sometimes they won't, but the most valuable thing is just getting on the phone with them so that you can really sense, like, the nuance and the inflection in their voice, and get a sense of, like, okay, what did they understand and what didn't they truly understand, and, like, is there anything confusing and whatnot. And so that has been really, really valuable as well. Honestly, I like having both, because
Yeah.
like the one-on-one, I showed it to you, now let's have a discussion about it. It has been really valuable.
Especially with other filmmakers, I think that's been valuable.
Yeah, that's the nice thing. But we email it mostly just to film collaborators for the most part. That has its own advantages, because they think a little more like a filmmaker. They can think about character and give you the exact feedback that you kind of need. But there's nothing like the feedback you get from watching it with a live audience. I think that's the one reason you want to be able to watch it with a group of at least 5, maybe 10, 15, 20 people, bigger
Watching
if
it
possible.
with anyone lets you see it with new eyes. So even if you can only just get one friend to sit down and watch it with you, and it lets you open your eyes again and see it for what it is, I think that's really helpful.
And we did that our first test screening. There was
Yeah.
literally one person there, and I didn't like that as much. It wasn't useless. It was valuable, and it helped us kind of know where it was. But I found it much more valuable when there were more people, because it wasn't like, it's like watching your favorite movie. Like, we always watch La La Land with our friends, and they always finish it, and we're always disappointed at how underwhelmed they are. And so, like, I feel like it just feels like, well, what's your opinion? But when it's a group of people, you can kind of get a sense of like, what's the general effect this movie's having on a group, and how is that varying from test to test, like,
Yeah.
having at least 5, I think, helps it feel a little less like, what's this person think of the film? And it's more like, how's the film working generally? It's a better sample
It's definitely
size.
better. Yeah, and that is one of the things I was going to mention as like lessons learned from this experience.
Yes.
So first of all, you need a venue if you're going to do a public screening. And if it's people you know and trust to invite into your home, you can do that, or into a friend's home. That can work. We kind of wanted to get people who didn't know us already for our first screening, and so we reached out to a local library that had a room that could work, and asked if we could use the room to screen and do a test screening. And because we were not a nonprofit, they said we could do it in exchange for holding like a Q&A session there later.
Like a community event, we would help them with that as like a volunteer exchange.
Yeah, which we were happy to do. So we set that up, and they said they would advertise it, and we said we'll advertise it, and we just stuck it on a bunch of Facebook pages locally and invited general public, but we didn't invite friends and family specifically. We tried to just put it out there for people we didn't know. And yeah, only one person showed up who was a kind of a connection. His wife had worked on the film as an editor, so he had never seen it before, so it was still valuable. But if you want, and maybe it'll be different for you, for us, that didn't draw a crowd to just post it on Facebook pages. And
yeah,
it was an experiment. So
that didn't work. So on the second round, we said, okay, we will invite people that know us, and we'll see. And so we actually reached out personally to a bunch of people that we knew, and we posted it on
I'd
other
say
groups
we
and
like
stuff.
reached out maybe to 100 people.
Well, and we posted all over like all the Georgia Film Facebook pages,
which we had done before, but
which we'd done, well, not as thoroughly, I think, that time. But it was interesting to me that this time every single person in the room knew us,
almost,
except one who was the brother of someone that knew us. He was the only person we didn't directly know, and so that was like kind of bad for other reasons, because I was like, okay, well, this has become like a group of people from the church we go to who are all like hanging out with us watching our movie. So of course they're going to be super gracious and really nice. But the two biggest valuable points were watching with a group that size, and sometimes even more so because you know them, helped me see the film anew again, and I could feel it. Like, Anna and I think we could both feel exactly where the pacing wasn't working, exactly what things were clear and unclear. And then we got a big bunch of feedback forms submitted, which were all valuable.
But and people can be honest. I mean,
they can be, and some of them laid it on a little thick, and then some of them
know when you're
were
screening
more honest.
Yeah, if people know you, that they're probably going to be a little kinder than someone who doesn't know you. But yeah, it was still valuable. I'd say we had probably about 25 people.
It was a good
for
group.
That screening.
And I would also say that they didn't want to stay for Q&A afterwards, which I find really valuable, but they did fill out the form.
Well, we were also short on time. We didn't have that room past a certain time when the library closed.
There were some other things that delayed us because of things outside our control, but meaning we ran out of time in the room. But that was lamented, and for me, I lamented the fact that we did not get to ask the audience questions live and get to hear them respond and hear them bounce stuff off each other to see what's really going on here and kind of dig deeper. But the forums are still really valuable, and watching it with them was really valuable. And the number one thing we learned from that second test screening was that our first half of the film was still surprising to us, despite the many minutes, like 20 minutes we'd cut from the film. The first half was still too slow, and it wasn't because, and I learned why, which for me, this might be going into a lot of detail on The Loved and Lost. It had a lot to do with what makes domesticity interesting in certain contexts and what doesn't. I won't go into details on that, but it was a breakthrough for me. Like, why is this so hard to watch and so not as interesting as I thought it would be? And what would make watching simple sort of domestic activity more interesting, and why is it working in films like Koreeda's films? So I learned we cut a lot afterwards. We cut another solid 10 minutes off the film. So the runtime of the film is reduced, and we tested it a third time.
Well, yeah, and I guess one other lesson I wanted to say from that second test screening was just to arrive very early at your location. My bad. We arrived, what, 15 minutes? Maybe it was 30 even
Well,
before
we were,
the screening. But we had already screened at the library before. So we were like, okay, we kind of know what it's like. We've tried out the venue. And then we showed up, and there had been some kind of a miscommunication. And the room that we had reserved weeks ago was under construction. They were painting it, and there was stuff everywhere, and it was just destroyed.
It was unusable. It was destroyed.
Completely unusable.
It would have taken like a whole day to clean it up and set up chairs. And
we're like, what? We have a bunch of people coming, and we didn't even know how many. Like I said, we invited 100 and posted it publicly, so there could have been more. So we didn't really know what to expect, and we had to hurry and make another room work and help them find a projector. And we had luckily brought our own speakers, but it took...
We brought backup speakers, but good big ones. And that was we were
saved
really
us.
lucky that we did that.
We were also lucky that someone who came had their own laptop as a backup, because our laptop had some issues. So there were a million technical difficulties that came up at that screening.
And that screening was really indicative of our experience making a feature film, because I think feature films just bring out the Murphy's Law in the universe hard.
They seem to.
I don't know what it is. We didn't have these issues test screening our short film. We didn't have nearly as many issues even just shooting our short. Of course, our issues were mostly just ignorance based, which is why we make films, right? So we can learn and get experience and get better. But man, yeah, that despite how much went wrong, a good group of people showed up. It was a comfortable viewing size for the room that we had. The projector looked good. The speakers sounded good. Everyone filled out their forms.
It was a success.
It was a success. And so
it was just a little embarrassing to have people coming and we weren't ready. And we were trying to get the room together, which wasn't really our fault. But
everyone was patient and understanding.
Yeah, we ought to have shown up much earlier and made sure that everything was working, because technical difficulties is just a thing. We also may have had time for a short discussion after the film had we not spent that time when people were arriving setting up.
That's very true.
That was a lesson I learned.
So the third test screening was at
Columbus State University.
Columbus State University, that's where it was. So I didn't get to attend this one, unfortunately. We had some illness in the family, which kind of nixed some babysitter plans, but Anna was able to go to that 2 nights ago. And that was actually a group of strangers that we didn't know, and they didn't know us, all except for our editor and her husband.
Her husband is a faculty member, and he was our one audience member at the first test screening. And he actually said, hey, I think that our film club might be interested in holding a test screening for you. That could be educational for them, and then for you, it gets you some people watching it.
So we had never considered using an educational institution as a form of test screening, but it's like a perfect place to test screen, because you've got, I mean, maybe not totally perfect, because these are film people, which has pros and cons, but they're students, young, and they're not like film professionals per se. And there's so there's just a bunch of students that they watch movies and they all have different tastes, and it's just good. It's another way to test it out and see how is this working. And it was interesting because this group of people from our church was almost all parents. In fact, many of them were parents that were
their kids had already left the home.
40s or 50s range was the average, I think, age range. There was exceptions to that. In fact, so there were some young teenagers, like 12, 13-year-olds, but there weren't a lot of those. There was mostly people in their 40s and 50s, whereas this test screening with students was people between 18 and 30, and most of them were like early 20s, not married, no kids. The whole audience, not married, no kids. And that, for a movie that was really domestic, was interesting. It was a totally different demographic. And so that's another nice thing about test screenings, is like hitting different demographics and stuff and seeing like, how's this play and how's this work for people?
And these are people who didn't know us, who didn't know our family or our city that we filmed in or our resources. And I actually feel like them being students was kind of the best of both worlds, because they
They could think
They have their
critically.
first impressions like any audience would, but they also are wetting their palates into like learning about film, and they would say, "Oh, hey, it's that thing where you plant and pay off or whatever," and they kind of like they're
I'm learning.
excited about seeing these things they're learning. And thinking about breaking down a film. So there was a lot of enthusiasm. I really appreciated
Did
the
someone
energy.
say that exact
It
comment?
wasn't planting and paying off. It was something else that they'd learned and right. Oh, it was dramatic irony. They were all excited about, oh, dramatic irony.
Look at
Look
how they
did
implemented
that.
the dramatic irony.
And I was like, yeah, good job. That's great. So it was cool.
That's kind of funny.
It's cool to see them like applying the stuff they're learning right now as they analyze the film.
But really, you're looking to just see, like, was there anything that was confusing? I mean, like, we
Yeah.
removed one tiny line of dialogue, and something that happens in Act 3 suddenly didn't make sense to, like, half the people there, right?
Yeah.
Like, they were like, why is he doing that? And it's like, oh, no one's ever asked us that question because we lost that one line. And I remember thinking, I don't think that one line is clarifying what he's doing in Act 3.
Well, and I'd
I
been
was
fighting
wrong.
for that line. We were trying to cut. There's 2 scenes we had for that line, and we cut one of them, and we did another one, and then we cut that one, and we didn't like either of the scenes. But it was that one line I was trying to hold on to,
And I
we
thought,
just
why would you hold
thought-
on to a full scene just to plant one tiny line of dialogue? And then all of a sudden, that one line of dialogue actually affected something in Act 3, and the audience said, why the heck is he doing this thing in his house? Like, it doesn't make
Didn't
any
make
sense.
sense anymore.
And,
Yeah.
and so I was shocked. I think that what I learned from that was that audiences are a lot more perceptive than I sometimes give them credit for. And sometimes we go, oh, it's good enough, people won't notice that little detail. Well, some little details make or break an Act 3 moment. Like,
Sometimes you just don't know until you test. You might think, oh, this is going to bother people, and you show it and they don't care. Or you might have stuff that you think you can't live without, and then you cut it, and either they don't notice or they do. And it's just
it's
a
good
great
to
way
test.
to know.
Always test it. Why would you want to submit a final film that's not been tested before and you have no idea? Like, people might ask questions or say things and you might go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. It's such a big project, like there's a million things you could or couldn't miss. And so, like,
you don't have to test everything, obviously, but I would do your best effort. And then if you're trying to workshop a solution, you can test it.
Even in advertising, like the Harmon brothers, they're like these famous advertisers. They test their scripts, they test edits, and they test their edits like crazy. They'll test them and test them and test them until they feel like this is working about as pretty much it's in the 95th percentile or higher. It's like about as high and good as we can get it. That's when they release, and everyone goes, wow, they're geniuses. How do they do it? It's like, well, they're not like just totally brilliant. They don't just do every single thing because they're born geniuses. They just test it, and they test it a lot to see how it's working. It's like R&D. You're researching and developing, and you're doing market research, and it's not all just like this crass business thing. It's like book editing. You're trying to communicate to people, and when you're doing something with this many moving parts, I think it's a little bit naive to think I can just sit in an editing room in the dark, do this all. I'm so fluent in this language. I've never made a feature before. Maybe you've made 4 or 5 features. Maybe you've made 100 features. If Adam McKay, who's made a bunch of movies, is still testing his movies like crazy all through the editorial, I don't think that any of us are too good for it. So.
Oh yeah, well, big studios always test their films too. It's just like,
Yeah.
it's just a safety. And
yeah, and on that note, I would recommend David Sandberg's Pony Smasher YouTube channel. Once again, he has a whole video on test screening and the truth about test screening in Hollywood, and how he talks about like most people's impressions of test screenings are like, you get the dumbest morons off the street to come and watch your movie, and then someone says, I think the movie needed more turtles, and then all the studio executives say, oh my gosh, we can even put more turtles in the movie. And he's like, that's not really what happens. It's actually, there's things that are sometimes frustrating about test screenings, but he said overall they're valuable and they actually help you learn about the film.
I love test screenings. I really enjoyed the last test screening that we did, and I've really enjoyed just sending out the film to individuals who are friends or collaborators or people whose work I admire, who I've never actually worked with, but who I feel comfortable asking for feedback. And that has been so enjoyable. It's just a way to collaborate and network with people. I never thought of it that way. I wasn't like trying to network by reaching out to people. It was actually people whose opinion I was like, I value your opinion. I'd love to see what you think of this. But then it just ends up that we collaborate. We are collaborating on the film, to the point where I almost want to put every single person at our test screenings in the credits because they did help make the film and make it work.
That's a really benevolent perspective. I think it's true, honestly. Sometimes I want to put test screeners. I mean, in our short film, we put all of our test screeners in the credits, actually.
We definitely could have if we'd gathered their names, which we didn't, but
we've test screened it for a lot more people with the feature than we did for the short. In fact, the short, I think the short had problems that could have been addressed if we'd done more than just one small test screen.
Yeah, that's true.
One of the shorts we did recently-ish, a few years ago. But yeah.
So I wanted to mention something about how we lay out the test screening that we learned in film school, and I think has stuck with us, which is to have people fill out the paper with the questions anonymously and then pass that in before doing a discussion. And I think that's really important. I definitely observed that in all our test screenings, but especially this last one because we did have both, which was that people,
the written feedback and the live Q&A.
The written anonymous feedback and afterwards a discussion, because in a discussion, first of all, not everyone's going to join the discussion, so you're going to miss feedback from some people, and people aren't going to share as freely. They're going to feel a little more like, oh, like I don't want to share that I was confused about this part, or everyone seems to think this about this character, so maybe I don't want to share that I think something totally different. And it's only when I go back and read the papers, for example, a group of people who were like, I didn't really like that character in this moment, whatever. And I said, anyone disagree? Do you guys feel differently? And no one really did out loud in the discussion, but I went back and read the papers, and some people were like, oh, I really love this character. I really related to her. And I think it just shows me that there are things people are willing to say anonymously on paper that they might not be willing to say in a group.
For sure. I super agree.
And so we always have people pass in their papers before we discuss, even though it's, you're waiting around for everyone to finish.
You don't want people revising their answers based on group solidarity,
exactly.
which
you don't want
people
them
are self-conscious about their opinions. It's strange.
Or they'll add notes like, oh yeah, I thought that was confusing too, even though they hadn't actually thought of that originally. So it's just good to gather everything and then do a discussion. But
that doesn't make the written feedback superior. It's different, and it gives you a better perspective in some ways. But I think that there's also things that the live Q&A does that the feedback, and in your experience and on this last test screening, because I wasn't there, what do you feel like the values were of the live sort of, verbal conversation that you had with the audience?
Oh, it was super valuable and super enjoyable. I just loved talking with these kids. I was surprised how long they were willing.
These kids
who were about our age,
tiny punks. They were so little.
No, some of them definitely were younger, but I wasn't sure how long we were going to have, and so I expected it to be like a 15-minute discussion, but they really got into it, and we ended up talking for about an hour, which it does not have to be that long, and I didn't expect it to be. But if it can be,
that's more value for you, right?
Yeah, sure, right. And they seem to be enjoying it and enjoying the questions, and I think I'll send an email out with those questions as well, the discussion questions, because those are also really important to consider what questions you're asking your audience.
Did you use the ones I texted you?
I did, and I added a few of my own as well as I went.
We came up with these incredible questions while Anna was driving to the test screening, and I was texting her.
We have done enough test screenings that I kind of knew some of the questions that you'd sent me from prior test screenings we'd participated in.
Some are the same as the ones that are on the feedback form. Some are a little different. Some, they start the same, but then you can kind of you can kind of follow a little bit more of a rabbit hole with the question and go into more detail, because people can talk a lot faster than they can write most of the time, especially in today's age of texts and keyboards. We've not gotten so fast with our handwriting, but we can, like the written stuff will take a long time to write down, and it's not that much, but the talking, people can talk and talk and talk, and you'll get a ton of feedback. And she recorded it, which I think is something I would definitely recommend, is do an audio recording of your test screen just so you have a record of it.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to stay out of the conversation as much as you can while you lead that discussion.
Never justify your creative choices, and if possible, don't let the director do that discussion as the lead. However, Anna, it sounds like, did a great job all by herself.
Well, I just told them, at the very end, if you have questions for me, then you can ask them, but I'm just going to ask you questions first. and I'm not going to answer them. So if they asked me a question, or if they asked a question and said, I was confused, what was the point of this? Then I would put it back towards the group and say, what do you guys think? What was the point of this?
Mm-hmm.
And let them answer it. And I didn't tell them like, oh yeah, you're right or you're wrong. I just kind of let them have a discussion about this film as they would coming out of the theater without having a filmmaker there to facilitate their discussion.
Not just a filmmaker, but the filmmaker.
Yeah. And just let them answer the questions and explain to each other and say, well, I didn't like this, or I did like this, and why. And anyway, so I would try to stay out of that conversation as much as you can. Let them answer their own questions.
Very nice language, Anna. I would command you to stay out of that conversation because I just think there's nothing worse than a self-conscious filmmaker who says like, this was confusing. And then the filmmaker responds by saying, well, the idea was, and it's like, well, no one cares what the idea was. It's your job to be getting feedback. So you don't want to do anything to impede them from, and if you at all start to get defensive, they're all going to stop giving you all of that valuable feedback that you're there to get in the first place. So like you're kind of wasting everyone's time if you start to get defensive, which is why I recommend producers to run those meetings, because they weren't the ones truly. The director, I think, gives the film a point of view. They're the protectors of the story, as Ron Howard says. And so it can sometimes be harder for a director to lead a Q&A. Especially in Hollywood, the director maybe becomes too high profile, and executive producers and studio representatives, or even just creative producers, no one knows them or their names or their faces, but that's not a problem for any of us. Luckily, that none of us as directors are really famous enough to matter. Like people aren't going to go, oh my gosh. And so like, what was it like working with so-and-so? I mean, if you have like name talent in your movie, but you know, that's nice that you don't have to worry about that when you aren't a celebrity. But
well, and you still want to be careful, especially with virtual, like if you're sending your film out, you don't want to publish it publicly anywhere. What we have done was upload a draft to Google Drive, and we share the link with people who we have to like give them permission to see it, and then we just delete it afterwards so that they can't have access to it.
Once that's an old draft, we delete it, we upload a new draft, and that goes out to new people. And so like, unless someone tries to download it, and you can restrict download access.
You could password protect on Vimeo.
People could try and steal the film, but like it's not a Batman movie. It's not like everyone's like, oh, it just leaked and I can like let this out loose to the public that's all waiting for. No one would really, right. Ours is like a cheap domestic drama.
You do have to be careful, because I've had a lot of people think this is a premiere. I want to go to the premiere, or like, can you send it to me so I can just watch it? I'm like, no, this is not a premiere. This is just to get feedback.
No matter how many times you use the word test screening, there are a lot of people who don't understand what that means. And so just make it clear at the beginning of the movie, this is a test screening.
What that means is this is not a finished film. You have to let them know. They're going to see VFX plates. They're going to see this is not finished color or audio. Mostly we just want to see how the story is working. So, The other thing I would say is sit in the back of the room if you can, or in the middle, but somewhere where you can watch the people around you.
Mm-hmm. I like sitting in
and get a sense of how they're responding.
Yeah, I like sitting in the middle because I could kind of hear a little bit more, like people making comments. I knew that there were certain people in the audience on our second test screening because I knew those people who were a little more vocal, maybe. And so I could hear little whispers like, wait, why did that happen? Or like, oh, I don't think that, like, oh, this is, or they'd even say like, this is what's going to happen. Like sometimes they were right and sometimes they were wrong. And so it's interesting to see like where they're at. But Anna sat way in the back.
Yeah, you sat in the middle.
Don't sit next to each other because there's no point in doing that.
I sat in the very back because I just like to watch people like, oh, they put their hands over their mouth at this part, or they kind of, or like, it's just, or they jump, or you can kind of see how they're responding.
There's so many jump scares in our domestic drama.
Not this one. No, I'm just giving an example. But anyway, hopefully that's helpful and encourages you to do some test screenings of your own, whether that just means sending it to individuals and doing a phone call afterwards, or you could try to get some sort of a public screening at a local library like we did. Or I loved the film club at Columbus State, and they were like, if you know anyone else who wants to test screen their film, let us know, because this was so enjoyable and we learned so much. So they were very generous, and I think there probably are other film programs at schools near you that would probably be open to that as well.
Yeah, it's great.
Can make it a learning experience for everyone.
And test screening your film, like Anna said, is a great way to like network and meet people. And even if it's just with film students, those film students will become film professionals, and those film professionals might be people you want to know in the future. And so you don't ever like boo-hoo on the little guys. They may get bigger than many of them.
You never know who's there.
If you're with a full graduating class size of groups of like film students, one or two of those people are probably going to go pretty far in their careers, or they may collaborate with you.
Have, and you don't know it.
Well,
or they're in the faculty.
I knew a young man in our film school who was like, before he even got into the film school, he was making waves, and he's still doing really well. But so anyway, my point is that it's a great way to network. It's a great way to learn, which is the main thing that you're trying to do, is learn your film. You're getting to know your film and where it really is, how it's actually communicating, which is helping you become more fluent in this filmic language, because you're like, saying words and testing out a combination of words, and then you see how this person understood it and how they're reacting, and you're learning communication skills, but you're doing it, with movies instead of with, the English language or whatever language. And so, yeah, it's totally valuable. I highly recommend it. And if you have any experience with test screenings that you want to share with us, email us at films@invisiblemansion.com, or respond to the email that you may have found the podcast through. And we would love to hear. If you also have questions about test screenings, if you're approaching test screenings or whatever, also feel free. Or if you have funny stories relating to experiences in test screenings, shoot us an email.
Well, and we go more in depth on this and every other step of producing a feature film in our Film and Family Academy. So if you really want in-depth help on these steps all the way through, then you can check that out as well on our website, invisiblemansion.com, and then just click Film and Family. So
yeah, awesome.
Thanks for joining us. Hope this was helpful.
We'll catch you on the next episode.
We'll see ya. Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, you'll love the Film and Family Academy, a program designed to teach anyone how to make a feature film.
No, we won't teach you how to put a camera on a tripod. This is for professional filmmakers who want to transition into a feature film career.
You cannot have a career making feature films until you've made at least one. Anyone can make a feature film using our proven model.
The things that are holding you back aren't what you think. You don't have to quit your day job, neglect family responsibilities, have tons of money, or sacrifice your health. There is a sustainable, healthy way to make your dream a reality, and that's exactly what you'll learn in the Film and Family Academy.
It's risk-free. If you follow all the steps in the program, you'll finance and finish a feature film by the end, or we'll give you your money back.
Learn more at invisiblemansion.com/film and family, or click the link in the show notes.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.